Hi, Grandma here, and I'm beginning a new book called The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. This first session is going to be kind of nuts and bolts, getting them out of the way before we actually start the story. The first thing we do when we have a new book is we preview the book. And the reason we do that is to get our brain activated. It's a little bit like warming up your muscles before you play a baseball game. So we preview the book. It kind of gives us an idea what the book is about. And then we can start reading it and comprehending it better. So the first thing we notice about this book is there's a symbol here that I think many of you might recognize. It is a swastika, and it is a sign of the Nazi Party during World War II. So just looking at the cover, we have an idea that they are going to play a role in this book. We also have here a picture of 4 children, 3 girls and a boy. And I imagine they also will be playing a role, but you can tell by their clothes that this story probably took place quite a while ago. We also see here that it says Corrie ten Boom with Elizabeth and John Sherrill. So she didn't write the book just by herself, but she had help writing it. We also see a picture of a building here and barbed wire. And down here we have something that looks like an official document, and it says Deutschland on it. Deutschland is the German word for Germany. Okay, when we're previewing the book, we look at the back of the book as well. And the back of the book, we have that same picture of the children. And we have one thing that we have is Corrie ten Boom. There's a quote of hers. "Every experience God gives us is the perfect preparation for the future only He can see." And then we have a little blurb. That's what it's called, a blurb, which is a little bit of a summary of the book. Corrie ten Boom was a Dutch watchmaker who became a heroine of the resistance, a survivor of Hitler's concentration camps, and one of the most remarkable evangelists of the 20th century. In World War II, she and her family risked their lives to help Jews and underground workers escape from the Nazis. So now we found out how the Nazis play into this. And for their work, they were tested in the infamous Nazi death camps. Only Corrie among her family survived to tell the story of how faith ultimately triumphs over evil. Here is the riveting account of how Corrie and her family were able to save many of God's chosen people. For 35 years, millions have seen that there is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still. Now The Hiding Place, repackaged for a new generation of readers, continues to declare that God's love will overcome, heal, and restore. Okay, when I open the book, the first thing I have in front of my book are a lot of quotes from a lot of famous Christians, like Joyce Meyer and Peter Marshall, Philip Yancey. And then we have a photo of Corrie ten Boom when she was much older. I really like her hairstyle. I think I might try to wear mine that way when it gets a little longer. And then we turn and we have the table of contents. And the table of contents is always very helpful in getting our brain activated, because this one has names for the chapters. We have a foreword, a preface, an introduction. The 100th birthday party is chapter 1. Full table is chapter 2. Carol is chapter 3. 4, the watch shop. 5, invasion. 6, the secret room. 7, Yusi. 8, storm clouds gather. 9, the raid. 10, Scheveningen. 11, the lieutenant. 12, Voot. 13, Ravensbrück. 14, the blue sweater. 15, the 3 visions. And then we have Since Then and Appendix. Let's start with foreword, preface, and introduction. Most books have maybe one, at the most two, but this book has three. A foreword is not by the author. It is written by someone usually who knows the author, knew the author, or someone very well known. And the purpose of it is to tell you why you should read the book. The preface is usually by the author themselves, and it tells you how the book happened, why they wrote the book, and how it evolved. The third is the introduction, and it's also often written by somebody who's famous, and it will prepare the reader for what to expect and what the main topics of the book are. Okay, so then, especially with books that are nonfiction, this book is nonfiction. That means it's true. So we're going to look in the back of the book. And the back of the book, especially nonfiction, it's not so much with fiction, but nonfiction, we see the appendix, and in it has a family tree. Nonfiction books often has things like this that you can refer to, like this family tree. This one also has a Ten Boom family timeline. So if you want to see what year each thing happened, you can. And then we also have, they're citing their references on the timeline. So they're telling you where they got the information. So for instance, one of them is Corrie's passport, which it'll be CP. So they're telling you exactly where they got all of it. Then the last page has something about Elizabeth and John Sherrill. And if you'll remember from the cover, it said that Corrie ten Boom wrote the book with Elizabeth and John Sherrill. They are co-authors. They didn't just interview her, but they probably did. But she wrote a lot of it. Remember, Corrie ten Boom does not, her English would be her second language. Her first language is Dutch. So they might have helped her with the English. They might have researched things for her, like put this timeline together, or the family tree. So they have helped her write this book. All right. Now I introduced you to a word, nonfiction. This book is also could be described as a biography or an autobiography. And that got me wondering, what's the difference between a memoir and a biography or autobiography? So I looked it up, and because a memoir is when a person writes their memories of an event or a series of events that happened, usually within one topic. So a memoir would not have this information in the back of the book like this has, and it would not be citing references. It would be strictly what is from a person's memory. Now, what's the difference between a biography and an autobiography? Well, a biography is written, is a story of someone's life written by someone else. So if I wanted to write the biography of George Washington, then it would be a biography. However, if George Washington wrote his own life story, and he has documentation, possibly in the back of the book, then that is an autobiography. Well, this book is kind of a combination. It's a partly autobiographical, but it's partly biographical because the Sherrills have helped Corrie ten Boom put it together. But regardless, they are both considered autobiography and biography. They're in a library, they would both be considered biographical. but they are not a memoir because they have too much information in the book that has been documented. So let's begin. And we're going to begin with the foreword so that you can see how it's written. All right, remember, the purpose of a foreword is it's not by the author, and it should tell you why you should read the book. It was the strangest of times. We wore tie-dyed shirts, listened to Jimi Hendrix, and watched the Vietnam War over TV dinners. Well, not everybody did that. I was not into shirts that made me dizzy. I hated psychedelic music, and I turned the channel whenever the war came on. I had more important things on my mind, like surviving. The year 1971 marked 4 years in a wheelchair for me. Although my diving accident was in the past, the quadriplegia was not. I was still a little shaky, living with total and permanent paralysis. Plus, I was still struggling to understand how God was going to use it for my good. It did not help that the world around me was unraveling at the seams. Somewhere in the mayhem, a friend gave me a copy of The Hiding Place. The back cover explained it was about the life of Corrie ten Boom, a survivor of Nazi death camps. I was intrigued. As I said, I was into surviving. Perhaps this gutsy gray-haired woman wearing a coat like the old raccoon thing in my mother's closet would have something to say to me. The first chapter had me hooked. Although Corrie was from a different era, her life reached across the decades. World War II was far different from my own Holocaust, but her ability to look straight into the terrifying jaws of gas-chambered hell and walk out courageously into the sunshine on the other side was, well, just the story I needed to hear. For years to come, when I would occasionally fall back into my own pit of fear or depression, the Spirit of God would tenderly bring to mind her well-known phrases, "There is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still," or "Only heaven will reveal the top side of God's tapestry." And perhaps the most poignant and powerful of all, simply, Jesus is victor. You can understand why when I first met Corrie ten Boom, I was filled with glee. She grasped my shoulder firmly and announced in her thick Dutch accent, "Oh, Joni, it will be a grand day when we will dance together in heaven." The image she painted of us skipping down streets of gold left me breathless. I could easily picture the scene of glory and gladness. It made me realize I had survived. From then on, the years flew. Corrie continued to write books, travel to countless countries, and even oversee the film they made of The Hiding Place. But time was catching up with her, and after several strokes, her tired body finally gave out. When I attended her funeral, a quiet ceremony with testimonies and tulips, I kept thinking of that moment we first met. I smiled to imagine that heaven was applauding and that Jesus was probably explaining to her his choice of strange, dark threads mixed among the gold in the tapestry of which she so often spoke. That was 1983. The years have continued to march on, and sadly, things are no less crazy. What few seams are holding the planet together are strained and threadbare. Like so many people wondering how to survive in a world that even dear Corrie would barely recognize. I take that back. She would recognize it, and she would know exactly what to do in the face of new wars whispering of global holocausts that threaten the survival of all mankind. She would firmly, yet gently, point people to the Savior, reminding them that he is still victor. She reminded us all of the old story that Jesus had conquered sin, no matter how ugly and pernicious it gets, and that soon, perhaps sooner than we think, he will finally close the curtain on sin and suffering, hate and Holocaust to welcome home his survivors. One more thing in the fall of 2004, as I was on a 24-hour flight to India, the decades finally caught up with me. I was in great pain, sitting on quadriplegic bones that were thin and tired. To pass the hours and to keep discomfort at bay, I started reading another Corrie book, Life Lessons from the Hiding Place. I got a lump in my throat as I read about her incredible passion to travel the world to share the gospel of Christ. At the age of 85, Corrie ten Boom was enduring flights like this one, and if she could do it, by the grace of God, so can I. It was all the inspiration and encouragement I needed for the grueling journey. Once again, Corrie ten Boom had spoken. Corrie's story is as current and compelling as ever. This is why I am pleased and happy to commend to you, part of a new generation of readers, the special edition of The Hiding Place. It is for every person whose soul is threadbare and frazzled, and for every individual who must walk into the jaws of his or her own suffering. And if you have gotten this far, it is for you. Go a little further and you will discover what I did so long ago. If God's grace could sustain Corrie in that concentration camp, then his grace is sufficient for you. With his help, you can survive, and Corrie would say you will. Joni Eareckson Tada, Fall 2005. Okay, so did she tell you why we should read the book? That it might give us courage when we are discouraged about something or fearful about something? Okay, then there's the preface, and the preface is written by the author. Now, the author in this case is Elizabeth Sherrill, and if you'll recall, right here on the front of the book, it says that she is one of the authors. So it is not written by Corrie ten Boom, but it is written by one of the authors. And the purpose of this is why and how the book was written. In May 1968, I spent several days at a retreat center in Darmstadt, Germany. At a time when most Germans preferred not to think about the Holocaust or even denied outright that it had happened, a group of Lutheran women calling themselves the Sisters of Mary took on themselves the task of repentance for their nation. They assisted Jewish survivors, listened to their stories, and published the truth about the Nazi past. While at the center, I attended an evening service featuring two speakers. The first was a man who had been a prisoner in a concentration camp. He had been brutalized and starved. His father and a brother had died in the camp. The man's face and body told the story more eloquently than his words. Pain-haunted eyes, shaking hands that could not forget. He was followed at the lectern by a white-haired woman, broad of frame and sensible of shoe, with a face that radiated love, peace, and joy. But the story that these two people related was the same. She, too, had been in a concentration camp, experienced the same savagery, suffered identical losses. The man's response was easy to understand, but hers? At the close of the service, I stayed behind to talk with her, Cornelia ten Boom. It was apparent had found in a concentration camp, as the prophet Isaiah foretold, a hiding place from the wind and a covert from the tempest, the shadow of a great rock in a weary land. With my husband John, I returned to Europe to get to know this amazing woman. Together, we visited the crooked little Dutch house, one room wide, where until her 50s, she lived the uneventful life of a spinster watchmaker. Little dreaming, she cared for her older sister and their elderly father, that a world of high adventure and deadly danger lay just around the corner. We went to the garden in southern Holland, where young Corrie gave her heart away forever, to the big brick house in Haarlem where Pickwicks served real coffee in the middle of the war. And all the while we had the extraordinary feeling that we were looking not into the past, but into the future. As though these people and places were speaking to us, not about things that had already happened, but about the experiences lay ahead of us. Already we found ourselves putting into practice what we learned from her about the following: handling separation, getting along with less, security in the midst of insecurity, forgiveness, how God can use weakness. dealing with difficult people, facing death, loving your enemies, what to do when evil wins. We commented to Corrie about the practicalness of the things she recalled, how her memories seemed to throw a spotlight on problems and decisions we faced here and now. But, she said, this is what the past is for. Every experience God gives us, every person he puts in our lives is a perfect preparation for the future that only he can see. Every experience, every person. Father who did the watch repairs in Holland and then forgot to send the bill. Mama whose body became a prison but whose spirit soared free. Betsy who could make a party out of 3 potatoes and some twice-used tea leaves. As we looked into the twinkling blue eyes of this undefeatable woman, we wished that these people had been a part of our lives. And then, of course, we realized they could be. Elizabeth Sherrill, Chappaqua, New York, September 2005. All right, now this was the author telling why the book was written or how it was written. Do you think she did that? I think so. She realized that these stories that Corrie told in lectures needed to be shared with other people, needed to be shared with people who might be living after she had gone. They didn't want her stories to die, and that they would help her write these stories down. Okay, now the final one that I'm going to read is called The Introduction. And this is written by Brother Andrew, who is the founder of Open Doors, author of God's Smuggler. And the purpose of the introduction is to prepare readers for what to expect, the main topics. Anyone who thinks Christianity is boring has not yet been introduced to my friend Corrie ten Boom. One of the qualities I admired best about this remarkable lady was her zest for adventure. Although she was many years my senior, she traveled tirelessly with me behind the Iron Curtain, meeting with clandestine Christian cell groups in the days when this meant risking prison or deportation. They're putting their lives on the line for what they believe, she would say. Why shouldn't I? If Corrie were alive today, I have no doubt she would insist on going with me to the current hot spots of persecution, and how she would delight in sharing her radical faith with bold believers like the Christian Motorcycle Association, that wonderful group of men and women who often drive their bikes into poor communities, then give them away to pastors who have no other way to get around. If you have never met Corrie ten Boom, the best way to enter into a lifetime of friendship with her and her Lord is through the pages of this book. As The Hiding Place celebrates its 35th anniversary, a new generation is responding to a ringing challenge. Come with me and step into the greatest adventure you will ever know. Okay, now this was much shorter. But did he prepare the reader for what to expect? Did he tell you what the main topics would be? Well, one thing that was a little bit different about this, the additional information, is we found out that she sometimes went behind Iron Curtain, which would have been in the 1960s, into the countries that, if they found she was there, she could have been persecuted again. She could have been imprisoned for preaching Christianity. We also found out that she lived a life of great adventure, danger, adventure. So that's telling us a little bit more about her than the others, but I don't think it really was satisfied the introduction of preparing you for what to expect or telling you what the main topics were going to be. Okay, so now we begin with the first chapter, and I'm not going to read the first chapter right now. I'm going to save it for the next time. It is called The 100th Birthday Party, but I want to ask you, what do you think it's going to be about? What do you have in your mind when you think of a 100th birthday party? Well, when I hear that, I think that it is a party for somebody who's very old, possibly in a nursing home, and all of their children and grandchildren come around, and they wear a crown on their head because it's their 100th birthday, and they have cake, and they have lots of presents, but they're really, really old. So do you think that's what this first chapter is going to be about, somebody who is very old? Well, when we read it, we'll have to find out. One of the things about reading, especially things that are perhaps difficult to read or difficult to understand, is to make predictions. Sometimes the predictions are right, sometimes they're wrong, but it helps you to understand and remember what it was about. So we'll wait until next time to find out if I was right in my prediction. Maybe you had a different prediction. Maybe yours will be more correct than mine. Bye-bye.